So you're telling me there's drama with Diontae Johnson? Well, we're going to talk about it here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Wes Euler, let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on this video. Hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily episodes as well as our breaking news updates. We thank you for listening, making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. If you want to help us out, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts with a positive comment, and you'll get a shout out at the end of the show. Joining me today, we got Wes Euler. Tony couldn't do his Tony Tuesday, so Wes was so obliged. He came over and you gave us some content. You switched it up. I appreciate you being able to be mobile, hostile, and agile.
Yeah, last time I was on a Tuesday, somebody tweeted me and said, "Oh no, where's Tony? It's Tuesday." All right, it's not my fault. Okay, so don't take it out on me. All right, you take it up with Mr. Carter and Mr. Sereno. All right, I'm Switzerland. I'm neutral in all this.
He's neutral in all this. But talking about neutral parties, Wes. Let's get into this Deontay Johnson situation, because we've already heard the rumors that supposedly Deontay Johnson wants a super duper payout contract, a lot like what AJ Brown from the Titans, a lot like Deebo Samuels from the Niners. There's this class of wide receivers now that's saying, "Hey, pay me, or I'm a stepping, or I ain't showing up," or something like that. Now, to be clear, the only reports we've heard are sourced reports from Andrew Filippomi of 93.7 The Fan. He said it about a few weeks ago. We talked about that on this very show when it happened. Since then, there wasn't much noise. Deontay Johnson hadn't said anything until this morning. And he put out a tweet that he later deleted. It was a picture of a statement, and it said, "I'm out the mix. If you hear my name, they're just on my bleep." Basically,
Johnson.
There you go. It's on his Johnson. Hey, there you go. You anyone that knows that reference, they get the picture when we're not violating any YouTube rules right now. But point being, that tweet went out around like 10-ish a.m. in the morning or so. You retweeted it, Wes. And then Andrew Filippomi came out with another tweet sourced saying Diontae Johnson did not attend the start of Steelers voluntary offseason programming today. He said the man wants paid like his perceived wide receiver peers, Terry McLaurin, that's the other one I forgot about, DK Metcalf, another one I forgot about, and Deebo Samuel. Should the Steelers give Diontae Johnson a new deal? That's the question that Filippomi's asking. Now, if you want to talk to Filippomi on the Fan, he's been talking about this. He's been going over this. But, Wes, I want to ask you, I guess before we get into this, Wes, I should further say what Diontae Johnson did tweet that he did not delete, because that tweet that he deleted, he let it go, and it wasn't. It seemed like, okay, it was gone, and then I guess a little bit after how everything started to play out, he said, "It be your own fans," quote unquote, with a laughing emoji and an SMA or a shrug emoji. And then he said after the Filippomi tweet, "Don't believe everything you see, LOL." And then he's also said, if they don't have a story, they're gonna make one. So very much this is very typical for wide receiver Twitter in the NFL, where it's cryptic tweets. We don't know what you actually mean, those type of deals. But I do think, Wes, this is a situation where it may be something, but it may not be. And he may just be sitting there like, what? No, that's not what I was talking about. That's not what this direction was going. We've seen this before where stuff gets drummed up during an off season because we don't know what these athletes are talking about. And then it turns out it was for something completely different. And the rumored and the sources and all those things, they're not as big a deal. Also, I think my biggest takeaway here is Filippomi's point about the voluntary workouts. One, we don't know, that's just him reporting that because there's no official log of that that's available to us. And two, half the roster usually misses voluntary workouts. That's not abnormal.
Voluntary for a reason. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, listen, there's a lot of different ways you can go with this. There's a lot to dissect there. Is Diontae Johnson just listening to a new Drake song and maybe he's in his feelings and he decides to get a little emotional on Twitter, right there? Or is he really upset because he feels like contract negotiations with the Steelers, a contract that he believes he's deserved and that he has earned, has maybe, at a standstill, is maybe, stalled out, if you will. Again, some people might claim to know. I don't think that picture is completely clear enough yet, but I do think, Chris, I won't fault you or anyone, and I'm kind of here myself. This was not the first day that Deontay Johnson has seemed a little cryptic on Twitter this offseason.
Right. He's had a few tweets that you're like, what does that mean?
A couple times he's been a little cryptic, a little okay. Is he hinting at something? Is he really frustrated? Is this just random? Again, is he listening to the newest Drake album and his feelings? But I think where most times, the majority of the times where there's smoke, there's fire with these types of things. And again, if I'm putting all these pieces together, I don't think the picture is completely clear yet, but I think it's very reasonable to think that, again, Deontay Johnson wants the contract extension, believes he's earned the contract extension. The two camps are not on the same page. You got to think that that's most likely over money in term, right? Two camps not on the same page. Diontae wants more. Steelers don't want to pay him what he's asking for. He feels like it's hit a standstill, or maybe he feels like it's just not going to get done, and he's going to have to play out this last season. Listen, if that's kind of the pieces that you're putting together and the dots that you're connecting, I don't fault you, because that's where I'm at as well too. But I also think you're right. We do have to be cognizant of, there's been plenty of these types of situations with athletes where it feels like, okay, like, what's going on here? And it's really nothing. It's really no big deal. But I do think, again, the majority of the time where there's smoke, there's fire.
I do agree with that. There is something there, maybe, but like you said, it could be many things. He could be upset that, wow, you're not giving me an extension right now. Man, I guess I'm gonna have to play my butt off this year so that someone wants me even more next year. But I think people assuming this, and here's another thing that I think people have to remember. People always get up in arms. This is one thing I always say about players when they're young and loved in Pittsburgh. Like when Juju was young and loved, I was like, man, I hope the city don't turn on him. And sure enough, TikTok and all that, it was, man, who is this kid? Like, there were so many people that didn't like him. There was a lot of people that did like him. I do think it's still a majority of Steelers fans appreciated Juju Smith-Schuster, but we saw that happen. But I say the same thing about Najee Harris. You see him over the weekend hanging out with kids at the Pirates game and like goofing off with him. And these guys are like, this is Najee Harris. I'm like, this is my guy right here. And like the way he's talking to these kids. There's nothing to hate about Najee Harris so far. But when athletes start to ask to not ask for money, but to be like, hey, my contract's up, it's time to get paid, and teams start to be like, okay, we have to go through the normal negotiation process, and fans are just like, why can't they just agree to a number? Why can't they just get this done? This kind of stuff happens, and people start questioning, loyalty, or is he good enough for this? Is he good enough for that? And that's where I think people go too far with this. And it's like, guys, of course, Deontay Johnson is going to try to get paid as much as he can in the NFL. This is his career. This is a guy who's now entering his fourth year in the league.
Yeah, he's also a third-round pick, so it's not like he was making top 20 money in his 3 years so far. He's been making probably $1 million a year. Is that right?
If that, I think it might have worked its way up to that.
Which, hey, that's Chris and I will take that money all day. But when you're playing in that type of market, it's all relative.
This year he would be a cap hit of $3 million.
Okay.
And last year was the first year he made over $1 million.
There you go.
So there you have it right there. He hasn't gotten his big payday, and again, he'll be 26 this season. He's just like about a month or so shy of being 26 right now. He'll be 26 this season. So this is the time to get your big deal. And of course he's going to want to fight for that. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the way with Deontay Johnson saying, hey, I want to get paid. Now the cryptic
trying to maximize my value. Yeah,
exactly. Now the cryptic tweets, maybe they're part of it, maybe they're not. I want to see how it is. It'd be different to me if he was saying this outright and like calling the Steelers out and pointing at them and stuff.
Or if he doesn't show up to training camp in July or something like that.
Then we're in a different place.
Yeah.
Then we're saying,
then this is a completely different conversation.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and there could be just some of that hardball going back and forth too, right? Where the two camps are at their standstill, they're at their stall, and Diontae thinks, okay, maybe if I make a little noise, that'll help get things done. Now, you and I might not agree with that. It's funny, we had a similar conversation as it related to Baker Mayfield and him going public with his displeasures just the other day. You and I did, Chris, on SNR. And this is not the same as that. It's not nearly to that magnitude, obviously, but you get what I'm saying. Just with guys, seemingly going public with their frustrations and their disgruntled nature.
Right.
I still think that there's no reason to, like you said, turn on Diontae Johnson. Now, I know that that's just a thing that fans do, right? Fans are going to be fans, and there are plenty of fans in this new era who like their guys more so or just as much as their team. But there's still a lot more old school people, even you and I, who are in our early 30s, who still, we're always going to root for the team before we root for an individual. We're going to root for what's best for the team as opposed to what's best for the individual. There's an odd balance there, but I do think for Diontae, like, it's tough to gauge that on social media. You know what I mean? If you're going to be cryptic on social media, fine. Just don't read your mentions. Just don't go through your mentions and take every account on there, especially the burner anonymous ones, seriously. And I do think that there's some fault on both sides with that. But again, I would say it's not even close to time to worry or panic, or is Diontae not going to show up, or is this going to affect Diontae this season? I still think we're at least late July away from having that conversation.
I agree with that assessment, but I do think it's worth to talk about what would it take to make him happy, and what is the wide receiver market that we're seeing right now? Because like Andrew Filipponi pointed out, there's a lot of wide receivers that are in this conversation. Now, AJ Brown, he didn't tweet something cryptic. He was like, "Oh, now y'all hate me," and stuff like that. But Terry McLaurin is another guy who's up for that. DK Metcalf is supposedly, there's DK Metcalf has tried to shoot it down, but there's continued to be rumors about him not being happy in Seattle with his situation. Deebo Samuel with the 49ers. There's a lot of questions with guys like that. And again, AJ Brown, all these big names, and Diontae Johnson finding himself in the middle of that group. I want to talk about where his value is and what the upcoming value for wide receivers might be in the NFL in just a second here. But first, we got to talk about one of our great sponsors, Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens is a great product. Has a great product called AG1. This product, AG1, is something that I take every day, and it's something I use to help me to start my mornings off. You drink. It's a simple veggie drink. It comes in a powder. You put it in some water. You drink it in the morning. It doesn't have any strong taste to it. You gulp it down, and all of a sudden you've got a ton of vitamins ready to start your day. It's gonna help with your gut health, give you more energy, optimize your immune system. And as an asthmatic, it's been helping me breathe a lot easier, even as allergy season is rolling around. I've been on AG1 for 3 weeks, and it doesn't taste like it's super healthy or heavy to gulp down. It's just a mild tropical taste that I really look forward to each and every morning. With one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. Their special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, aging, and all the things. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition, especially heading into the flu and cold season. It's just one scoop and a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements or look out for your health. It's just it costs less than $3 a day and contains less than 1 gram of sugar and supports better sleep quality. Again, I can attest to that. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase of AG1. All you have to do is go visit their website, athleticgreens.com/NFL Network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NFL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. We're also brought to you by betonline.net. The NBA playoffs are well underway. The Stanley Cup finals, or playoffs, are coming around the corner, and Major League Baseball is full in swing. There's so many things to bet on in sports, and betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NBA playoffs and the start of MLB baseball, and of course the NHL playoffs, all right on betonline.net. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. And when we do back-to-back ad reads, we keep it rolling here, Wes, because we got our commercials in. Now, again, comparing Deontay Johnson to all those guys I just mentioned. Now,
yeah,
that's the thing, is that the wide receiver market is so competitive in the NFL. With anybody, and each one of those guys, Deebo Samuel, you saw what he did for the 49ers in their efforts to get to the NFC Championship game. You've seen what he's become he's kind of what Le'Veon Bell said he was. I'm a running back and a wide receiver. Deebo Samuel became that. From the opposite end, he was a wide receiver that also was a running back for the 49ers. Then you have A.J. Brown, who has all the athleticism, all the traits you want, just hasn't clicked in to be like the A1 wide receiver that he looks like he could be. And then you got Terry McLaurin, who has been stuck in a bad quarterback situation, but has been known as one of the toughest receivers in the league to cover. All
8 different quarterbacks in 3 years.
Exactly. All of these guys could make a case for pay me, and Diontae Johnson, when you put him up in that group, it's tough to say, well,
he's fifth. Of those five guys that we've talked about here, he's fifth.
And that's not a slight, because these guys are very talented.
But I would pay all 4 of those guys before I paid Diontae. I mean, pay. I'm talking big contract, $20 million per year plus.
Right.
If it's hey, you can get Diontae at 14, 15 per, or you could get DK Metcalf at 23, 24, 25. Okay, then we're having that conversation. But just in terms of all things being equal with the money, yeah, he's the 5th out of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, A.J. Brown has flashed brilliance. Deebo Samuel has shown brilliance in just a couple years. DK Metcalf at times is uncoverable. And as we mentioned, Terry McLaurin puts up really impressive numbers still and does a really good job when he's had 8 different starting quarterbacks in his 3 years with the Washington. He's had like 3 nicknames for the team that he's played for in that span as well, too. That's no slight on Diontae. That's just the truth. So it starts to get into me, really, then what's the money? What's the ask? How's that compared to everybody else? Chris, I know you've referenced this on Locked On a bunch of times, Spot Track, which is that's the Bible for sports contracts, basically, right? The best way to put it. It's the sports contracts Bible for every sport.
Mm-hmm.
You can see up against the salary cap. You can see contracts, all that stuff. According to Spot Track, Deontay Johnson's market value, 4 years, a little over $88 million per, which would pay him on average a little over $22 million per year. That's substantial coin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is substantial coin. So all of a sudden, the question becomes: does Diontae deserve to be paid in that same? Maybe a little bit less than those guys. Maybe those guys are in the 90s, right? And Deontay's at $88 million.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have him in that same stratosphere to pay him a relatively similar contract?
Now,
I don't know if I do.
That's a very good question. Because,
certainly probably wait another year before I do, though.
Right. Right now, you can't say now. But here's one thing I want to do before we get to that question. Let's look at all 5 of these guys.
Sorry, I jumped the gun there. I apologize.
You're totally fine. You're totally fine. Because this is where we are going. But let's look at these 5 guys. One thing to remember: they're all from the same draft. They're all drafted in 2019. They all have the same start time. If you look at their pure numbers overall, DK Metcalf has the highest yards at 3,170 with 29 touchdowns, also the highest of the group. Next behind him in yards is Terry McLaurin, then A.J. Brown, then Diontae Johnson, and then Deebo Samuel again in receiving yards. Now, the crazy thing is if you throw in the rushing yards, Deebo Samuel would then jump not only Diontae Johnson, but also AJ Brown, and actually also would just fall short of Terry McLaurin there. So there's other factors to that as well. But if you look on a per game basis too, Deontay Johnson at 58.8 yards per game played, that's the lowest rate of all those guys. Each of them is well over 60. So you look at that in their production and what they've done with their teams, but I think there's also context that needs to be applied. Deontay Johnson, people just assume, well, he was with the Steelers. That means he had a good time with the quarterback situation.
Didn't have Ben his first year.
Didn't have Ben his first year, and he had Mason and Devlin Hodges his first year. That was a rough start as a rookie. 2020 was his year to get acclimated with Ben, and Ben was fine for about 10 games, then fell off, and then 2021 was the worst year of Ben Roethlisberger's career. So this is where I say about
he did
Deontay
also,
Johnson.
to be fair too, he did also have his position coach pass away in that span as well too. In training camp in the dorm room.
Yeah,
tragically.
Daryl Drake passing away. I mean, that's something else that happened with this team that was a big impact. I mean, I remember at Latrobe, that was something that they were just like, wait, what? Like they took it was hard on the entire team, and how can it not be? So lots of things have been in Diontae Johnson's way. And despite this, he did have drop issues, 2 seasons ago. He had drop issues at the end of this past season, but he did take a step forward. Despite that, Ben Roethlisberger's problem, the offensive line issues, he still had 1,161 yards and 8 touchdowns through the air in 2021. Imagine what he could have been in a year with Ben's prime.
It's a great point by you.
And that's where I'm saying, like, I get Deontay's point is that, man, and here's some, you've never seen him pout. You've never seen him do the stomp or like the come on or anything, not to bend.
The Antonio Brown sideline antics.
Yeah. Exactly. And not just Antonio Brown, over the years, you could name superstar receiver after superstar receiver that when something doesn't go their way.
T.O. and Donovan McNabb were fighting on the sideline.
T.O. and Donovan. Hey, just go look Justin Jefferson, the way, and he's not like disrespectful with it, but he's like, Kirk, what are you doing? Like those type of moments. Deontay Johnson could have done that at any point in time with a lot of the passes been through this year that were underthrown, missed by the target, but you never saw him do that. And yes, he did drop passes towards the end of the season there, and that issue came back up. But to me, this was a guy who stomached those problems, and you saw him all last season. And I talked about this with Jenna Harner just last Friday on the show. He came in all training camp, first guy on the field, catching tennis balls, catching footballs, doing everything he can to work on his hands. It's clear he believes in what he needs to do, and he knows he has to be better, Wes. That's where I'm saying, like, I see a lot of Steelers fans that are like, goodbye, see you, we don't need you. And I'm like, you
want that guy.
You do want him. Do you want to overpay for him? No.
Exactly.
But the question is, what is overpaying him at this point, Wes?
And I think we need to find out this year, Chris, is Diontae Johnson a good player or is he a great player?
Right.
Right? Because I think if you're being reasonable, you should agree Diontae Johnson is a good player.
I agree.
The question is, though, is he a great player? Because we've seen moments of it. You make some very valid points about how he certainly hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows in terms of the things he can't control around him through his first 3 years with the Steelers either. But is he a good player or is he a great player? Because I think in any salary cap league, right, doesn't matter if it's the NFL, if it's the NBA, if it's the NHL, I think they probably have a salary cap in the MLS as well too. Any salary cap league, Chris Carter, the biggest mistake that you can make is paying a good player great money. Point blank, period. The biggest mistake you can make in salary cap leagues is paying a good player great money, and you don't want to do that. Even though you don't have to pay the franchise quarterback anymore, you still can't afford to do that as you retool this thing, especially if you want to keep the defense together, especially if you do want to, maybe be able to potentially make a splash and go and get your next quarterback. You can't pay good players great money. So that's why I think, too, it all comes back to me. Unless the Steelers are really somehow able to lock Diontae Johnson up on a team-friendly contract this offseason, which I think we can all agree seems unlikely at this point. I think you got to wait this thing. You got to make this thing play out, and maybe then you run the chance of losing him. Someone makes a bigger offer next offseason, and Diontae ends up going. But I think you need one more year to find out. Okay, is Diontae Johnson a good player, or is he a great player, and how are we going to pay him, and how much of that cap percentage do we want to commit to him?
That's a good question. And again, when we're looking at where things are with paying him, you're going to have a lot of teams shelling out a lot of money. There's like Juju Smith-Schuster. At one point, Juju Smith-Schuster, I mean, he's the youngest player to ever get to 2,000 receiving yards in the history of the NFL. And Juju couldn't get a contract with another team. Well, with a big contract,
can't get a long-term deal.
He can't get a long-term deal because there's so much talent that just continues to pour into the NFL at the wide receiver position. And is that fair? No, but it's part of the business. And I think that's where you're finding a lot of things come to a head with it. And you're saying, hey, you know what? This is just how it is. Unfortunately, we have to spend this money. But also, I think an important thing to put into context too, and I say this all the time, but what about the expanded salary cap? Because
we're
seeing
it's only going to continue to go up.
We're seeing it go up every year, right? And when I'm looking at how the expanded salary cap and how it works, I'm looking at like, what are going to be the new numbers as far as everything goes? Because this year, like for example, the base salary cap this year is $208,200,000. It's expected to jump up to around $225 million next year. So, which is why we're saying a lot of these contracts, like Patrick Mahomes and all these other deals that quarterbacks signed that we thought were crazy a couple years ago, they make a lot of sense now because now
like TJ Watt's contract's going to look great in 2 years.
It's going to look fantastic, and you're going to be sitting here saying, "Whoa, wait a minute, that percentage-wise works out." So, percentage-wise, how would that look for Diontae Johnson? Looking at how numbers work, let's compare a comparable receiver. Let's say DJ Moore of the Carolina Panthers. His average per year in his contract right now with the Panthers is about $20.2 million a year, roughly. And of the salary cap of $208.2 million, that's about 9.8%. When you're looking around that range. So let's say that Diontae Johnson does want $22 million a year. I think that's a lot higher than what he's probably asking for. But let's just go with that. So 22 out of 225, that'd be 9.7%. That's around the same range, crazy enough, as what DJ Moore is getting paid. And that's
not a crippling, that's not a bad percentage for a wide receiver.
If you think that guy is truly your number one wide receiver for the next 4 or 5 years, that's the money that you pay that guy. Now the question is, do you think he's the number one wide receiver and he's deserving of that?
Good or great? That's what I think this all comes back to. You're absolutely right, and that's a really good parallel by you to draw, because I'm not even talking a number one wide receiver like Antonio Brown was. I'm talking a number one wide receiver like, of course, I'm going to draw a blank now. A number one wide receiver like
Stephon Diggs.
Diggs. Although he had a massive year 2 years ago.
He did have a massive. Keenan Allen.
Keenan Allen's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
You will ride with a guy like that. You will pay a guy like that. Not make him the highest paid wide receiver in the league, but you will pay for a guy like that. Absolutely. But just Diontae needs to prove that he's that guy. Not that he's Antonio Brown level elite, but that he is a number one wide receiver, that he's one of the best 20 dudes, 25 dudes in the world.
I agree with that. And for the record, over the past so many years, Keenan Allen's salary, his salary cap hit or cap number this season is going to be $19.2 million. I believe his average over the according to overthecap.com and Spot Rec is around that $20 million range right now with what he's worth. And again, but that's a guy who was on another contract. He's 28. He was 28 years old when he signed his deal. He'll be 30 this season and 32 in 2024 when that contract expires. But that's why I brought up this comparison, because we're not just talking about, when you think $22 million, like, whoa, AB made 18. That's crazy.
Right.
You always have to remember things are very different year by year, especially now that there's an added game, added playoff games, and there's so much more revenue going into the league, and the betting money, because that is a huge part of what changes this. So when you hear those numbers get thrown out and you hear, do you think Diontae Johnson's worth $22 million? Understand that number, if you just jump at it immediately from where you think you understood how a receiver is supposed to be paid, you're like, that's outrageous. This is crazy.
Right.
But when you look back at it, you're like, actually, that's normal. That would be decent wide receiver one money. It's just the question is he worth that in your mind? Some Steelers fans feel no. Some Steelers fans feel yes. I think that's going to be a big question. But either way, Wes, the Steelers have to be prepared for if whatever they do throw at him, because I do think they have a number in mind. I think it might be closer to the $18 million range. That would get that percentage down a little bit, because the Steelers, like I've said, they're going to be a defensive team. They're going to be a running team. They're going to be a balanced team, unless they get their quarterback of their dreams next year. But but this is a team that I don't anticipate to say, hey, we're going to be airing it out. This is going to be Killer B era, in Pittsburgh. So I look at that, or would it be Killer J's this time around? Because if they get CJ Stroud and they have Diontae Johnson and they have Najee Harris, we'll work on that.
Pat Fried Jermuth.
Right? Yeah, I was like, I'm trying too hard. But point being, getting a star receiver might not necessarily align with the plan, or signing a star receiver to keep around might not align with the investments the team wants to put in. But also, having a good receiver helps, or a star receiver helps any roster, and it can help make things a lot smoother. Look at what Santonio Holmes did with that 2008 Steelers team. They weren't a passing team by any means, but having a playmaker like him was a big reason why they won the Super Bowl. So how do you prepare for that if that guy doesn't want to sign the money? A lot like how Le'Veon Bell didn't. You better have backups on the roster, and as of right now, they don't got that many. Chase Claypool, Cody White, Anthony Miller. Those are your only options, and you're not trying to go in here saying, oh yeah, these two guys that were mostly practice squad last year, they're ready to just become full-time rotational wide receivers in the NFL. No, you need to get guys in the draft. We'll talk about that and how they might do that in this next segment here, right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about RockAuto.com. RockAuto, one of our great sponsors. It's the best place to save time and money when you're looking for parts for your car or truck. So visit RockAuto.com today. Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump is $353 from a chain store, but when you go on RockAuto.com, it's $216. RockAuto is a family-owned business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. RockAuto's prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything that you could need, from brake parts to tail lamps to motor oil and even new carpet. So go explore their easy-to-use website today, and when you do, you'll be able to find the solution for your auto part needs. But when you do, go to RockAuto.com right now, and you'll see all the parts available for your car or truck. When you go there and you purchase your part, go and be sure to write Locked On in there. How did you hear about this box, so that they know that we sent you? Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit RockAuto.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Wes Euler. I forgot to also throw in all your accolades and titles, sir, in the first segment there. Of course,
what
you can
accolades
hear
and titles?
Oh, please! You hear them all the time on Steeler Nation Radio. You hear them all the time on the Ears and Beers podcast. If you're a West Virginia fan, check out all his great work at Wesley Euler on the Twitterverse. Now, Wes, let's dive back into this, and this is something. I don't know why that happened.
Just wanted to hear the funky bass line one more time.
Yeah, I guess so. That night in Tunisia background. But back to what I was saying. You don't want to you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're vulnerable at the wide receiver position. We've talked about this before, and this is why I do think the Steelers are going to draft 2 wide receivers in this draft class. One, I'd say either between day 1 and day 2, and then another that'll come on day 3, because then you'll add a guy that you're expecting to contribute sooner rather than later, and then a guy that you see prospectively could become that guy, because that's what they did back in 2010 when they traded away Santonio Holmes because he kept violating team rules, and they had to say, like, you know what, we're done with this, we're not getting in trouble for you anymore. And they went and they drafted Emmanuel Sanders in the 3rd round, and then they drafted Antonio Brown in the 6th round. Now, Emmanuel Sanders was thought to be the guy who was going to be the next step of the wide receiver evolution in the Steelers. It turned out it was Antonio Brown, and he just became, the most talented wide receiver this organization has ever seen. But this is why I've been saying this all along, is that the Steelers, with Diontae Johnson's situation, you can't guarantee that he's going to be the guy. You can't know that he's going to sign the money that you think, and you also don't know how this last season is going to go. He may, with Mitch Trubisky, light it up and put out some monster numbers. He may still have some drops issues, and then you're in a position where, do you have a wide receiver 1? Does Chase Claypool become a wide receiver 1?
He plays into this equation too, certainly.
Exactly. And Wes, that's my big question, is how do they handle this as far as keeping wide receivers a talented group on this roster while still also saying, hey, we're trying to fix the offensive line. We're trying to find our quarterback of our future, and we're trying to make this an elite defense.
Yeah, I think you covered most of it, but I would even go one step further. So you have to draft a wide receiver in the top 100 in the NFL draft next week. Okay, so whether that's your first pick at 20, your second pick at 52, your third round, right? You have to draft a wide receiver in the top 100. I just think that has to happen. I would even say you might have to draft a wide receiver at pick 20 or pick 52 as well, just because I think there's going to be at both of those picks, they're going to have an opportunity to get a very talented guy at that position. I think best case scenario, Sky Moore falls to 52 and you nab him, but I don't know if that's happening. The second part of that is, as you said as well, I think you have to take a wide receiver on the third day of the draft as well. Sixth round, seventh round, if there's somebody there that you love in the fifth round, whatever it may be. But I think you have to do the Emmanuel Sanders AB thing. You have to come out of the draft with two guys, one of them earlier in the process, one of them later in the process. And I still think you got to sign a veteran in this, what would be now third wave of NFL free agency. There's still some very talented guys out there that have accomplished a lot in their NFL careers. We could debate the names, the Jarvis Landrys and the Julio Jones and all that, but there is a nice crop of wide receivers that are still available out there. Odell Beckham's, right? There's a wide range of guys there in that free agency group for wide receivers. So I think still, Chris, you got to add 3 more before training camp starts, because Diontae and Chase are obviously, 2. But you mentioned the Cody Whites, the Gunnar Olszewskis. I don't want to have to rely on those guys. And if you only add 2 more wide receivers to this roster, make no mistake about it, you're going to have to rely on one of those guys at some point, because you're only going to really have 4 guys that you trust. One of those guys is going to get hurt at some point. Newsflash, it's the National Football League. That's what happens. So I think if you add 2 in the draft, and then you add a nice value veteran who can maybe be like the adult presence in that. And I don't mean that in the Baker Mayfield kind of way, but just
I got you.
A veteran presence in a wide receiver room where everyone's on their rookie deal. I mean, Diontae and Chase are still on their rookie deals. If you draft 2 guys, they're rookies. You need just a veteran presence in that wide receiver room, I think, too. So that is how I think you go about it, because you're right. That is, maybe there and strong safety just feel like the only kind of position groups that you're still really looking at on this roster and going, all right, you got to add more there. I think we would all like another running back, but you got to add some wide receivers, and you obviously have to add a strong safety as well.
No, I agree. You do need to add at least a veteran there as well along this. And strong safety is part of that equation, but this is more than just getting trying to land. Like, people are probably like, well, wait a minute, Odell Beckham Jr. They're looking for a guy who can be an older presence in the room, who can be the person who steps up and says, hey, I know what it means to be in the NFL for quite some time. I have experience.
To win playoff games. Yeah.
Exactly. Or just even like to step up when to step up during the regular season, to have a guy who's not on his rookie contract, and there are guys out there, Willie Snead, Keelan Cole,
another great one.
For example, getting guys and obviously not the Antonio Browns and even Odell Beckham Jr. I think that's a bit of a stretch, and I think Will Fuller's another big name, but he's always hurt. You want a guy that you can rely on. I think there could be some older guys that would be better fits. What about a return of Emmanuel Sanders? And a lot of people talked about how Sanders burned his bridge with Pittsburgh with his Peyton Manning comments, but Ben Roethlisberger's gone now. I think that's right. It might go over a little smoother. But another option, T.Y. Hilton is still a free agent.
That's another good one. Someone like that's not going to cost you very much.
It's going to be a 1-year deal, very much like Juju, a 1-year deal, probably $4 or $5 million with incentives tacked on, where if they do great, all right, you paid for that. That's fine. But that's where I'm at. You get a guy like that on top of your 2 additional wide receivers that you drafted. And then, like you said, you're going into the season with 5 dudes that you're thinking to count on: Diontae Johnson, Chase Claypool, 2 rookies, and the veteran that you signed. And then you're hoping Anthony Miller, Cody White, one of those guys, or maybe even an undrafted dude that you bring into camp, one of those guys becomes the 6th guy, as well as the Gunnar Olszewski guy. So because we also know after the 2016 AFC Championship game, when the Steelers were down to Antonio Brown, Darius Hayward Bay, Eli Rogers, and oh man, gosh, I'm blanking on Kobe Hamilton. Like that was
Kobe
they
Hamilton.
they were barren for wide receivers because Martavis Bryant was out for the season, Marcus Wheaton was out for the game, and Sammy Coates' hands were broken. So like they went from having 4 guys that they really counted on to with a fifth and a sixth option to one guy they could count on with a bunch of dudes that they were kind of like, wait a second, you're the second and third options. So I do think that there is an emphasis there to make sure that there's at least 5 dudes that they're confident about, that they're excited about on the roster, and then at least have 2 or 3 guys that'll battle for that 6th spot to be the return man / the special teams ace / the additional wide receiver among the group.
That is the formula. Listen, as much as we believe, and I'm with you, that the Steelers want to win this year by having one of the truly elite defenses in the NFL and by being able to run the football and control the clock and hit the occasional big play, the NFL is still, to win in the NFL, you got to be able to throw the ball and score points. You're going to have to, at some point, you're going to be down a touchdown in the 4th quarter or whatever. You have to be able to throw the ball and score some points. So yeah, I think if you have the 5 locked and loaded, like we said, plus 2 or 3 other guys that are pushing 2, that creates competition and a sense of urgency for the rookies. That provides real depth in the case of an injury or 2, which is obviously a realistic possibility. You could even say a realistic probability. That, to me, I think is how you minimize some of that risk that you were discussing at the beginning of the segment.
That's what I'm talking about there. So we don't know how Deontay Johnson's situation is going to play out. We don't even know what his actual stance is. But what we do know is that there is a strong wide receiver market. His numbers, I think, are more impressive than people realize because of what he's had to deal with at the quarterback position in his time with the Steelers. And when you look at the numbers that are being thrown out there, what he might want, which we don't even know if it's what he actually wants, the $22 million number that was flashed out there, and it's the biggest number I've heard, it's actually not as absurd as it sounds when you compare it to what the actual salary cap going forward is going to be. And again, that 9.8% number that I gave earlier with that salary, that number is going to diminish as that contract goes on because the salary cap is going to continue to increase. So
inflation.
To put it simply. Wes, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. You're always a blast to have on here. We have a lot of fun, man. Let people know they can find you, follow, and get more of your work.
Yes, sir. Steelers Nation Radio hosts the Steelers Blitz with Arthur Moats at noon on weekdays. You can get us in podcast form on demand every single day. Steelers Blitz, wherever you get your podcasts, you can listen live at noon. Steelers.com, Steelers app, iHeart.com, iHeart app. And then, yes, as Mr. Carter is kind enough to mention for me, if you are a fellow tortured Mountaineer soul, you can find me talking about WVU sports as well, too, on the Ears and Beers podcast.
Absolutely do check Wes out. He does great work. That's why I always bring him on this show, because he's such a great dude and he knows his stuff. Thanks again, Wes. You can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, or YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of these episodes Monday through Friday, as well as our breaking news updates. You can also find me, Chris Carter, on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques, as you see below. And again, if you want to help out the show, give us a 5-star review with a positive comment. When you do both at the same time, it gets to us. It takes a few days, but when it does, we give you a shout out at the end of the show. Thanks again for checking us out. We'll be back with Tony, because he got to be special. He got to come on Wednesday and mess things up. And now it's just because he's busy. But
don't blame me.
Exactly. Don't blame Wes. But we'll have Tony Serino on tomorrow talking more about your Pittsburgh Steelers.